Okay, so we are recording, and this is a video series on astrology versus tarot. I have one of my tutors here, Richard Swatton, who is absolutely amazing at what he does, very, very knowledgeable, who is also a musician. I was about to say a magician there. Freudian slip, methinks.
Well, I used to be that as well when I was a boy.
Absolutely. Who has studied with Liz Green, various other professors, and is actually one of the lecturers at the LSA, London School of Astrology. I have been very fortunate to be a part of a lot of Richard's lectures and have seen him literally work wonders before my very eyes with some of the symbolism. So welcome, Richard. Do you want to just give us
Okay, you're fading in and out. That happened several times, unfortunately. I don't know how it's recording, but your voice was fading in and out there. I don't mind that.
I'm going to have to I think what I'm going to have to do is get a new microphone, because if I record with this and if I do it without, I think we're going to get the same thing. So,
right.
Give me just a second.
Sure.
You. So, Richard, if you would like to just give us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yes. A little thing about me. Well, I'm an astrologer. I'm a professional astrologer, and I've been studying astrology since 1976. But my main profession is as a psychotherapist. I would say, if I had to pigeonhole myself, I would say I'm a integrative psychoanalyst. And by that, what I mean to say is I have psychoanalytic thought, and I went through my own therapy, obviously 12-year Jungian analysis and more summon trainings and things like that. So my theoretical background is in analysis, psychoanalysis, understanding dynamics, and so on, and treating that treating emotional, relational, mental problems within the context of a relationship. That's essentially what psychotherapy does. And I've been doing that since 1994, and I enjoy it very much. I think my best thing is in client work, which I enjoy. But I've always had an inclination towards, let's say, the occult, the spiritual, the things beyond. Always had a curiosity about that. You know, I was reading books on hypnosis around about 11 and hypnotized my first rabbit at 12 and started I wanted to be Dr. Dolittle, you know, when I was 5, when I saw him on the, you know, all of that. So, so since that time, 1976, I came across somebody who was an occultist, who was a theosophist and occultist, belonged to the Western mystery tradition, and he taught me astrology. And in fact, I met him in Bristol.
That's awesome.
And I met him in Bristol because I was a representative of the Portsmouth and District Magic Circle at the time. I was 16, 17. And there was a convention going on here, and I was a representative of that, and I did my little act on stage, and he was there and introduced himself and his wife and his children and so on. And we started conversing, and he would send me an astrology book every 2 weeks. And send it back, you know, learn it, all of the stuff. And after a year, I went to Wales to meet him, and you know, a long 8-hour, 10-hour conversations about this, that, and astrological symbolism was just one part of it. But then after a while, I moved more into psychotherapy than occultism, although I've done ritual and bits and pieces of that, steeped in that tradition. And but then I moved on to psychotherapy, and when I found Noel Till and 70s producing stuff to do with psychological astrology, how to use the symbols of astrology to understand the essential character of a person through the natal chart. And the development of a person is what we were talking about before when we didn't say was that the horoscope is a living thing inside someone. It moves, it has developments. You can tell when developments are going on inside a person. You can tell their essential character, the basis of the patterns that they're fated to experience. So that was fascinating to me. And I took up the Liz Green course in Jungian and humanistic psychology with House of Portas and Liz Green. And I was there for 3 years, 85 to 88. And after that, I started lecturing. So I've been lecturing since 1988. And but all of that time, I was also a jazz pianist and composer. I went to Leeds and Trinity College of Music. And but in the 90s, I changed over my profession because I didn't like the lifestyle of a touring musician. I was a teacher and all that. So I've undertaken the Jungian analysis, and I for a long time. So I became a fan of Jung and then an advocate of Jung, and I like his method of development through a connection to your own unconscious. And we're back into the realm of symbol and images and dreams. And by your own unconscious, I mean that matrix of potentiality of which consciousness, our conscious ego, is just a part. And astrology gains you access to that too. It's fascinating, for example, to see the development of transits and progressions in a chart and a person's dreams, as well as their experiences in life and all that. So,
sorry, can I ask you to
symbols are, just to finish, symbols are intrinsic to that, like they were intrinsic to Freud and so on. And there's a magical use of symbols in which you can enter them and use them for divination. And then there's interpretation of them psychologically. And so that's a basic introduction to me. Sorry, I've hogged the Had the conversation, but I wanted to give you a more full explanation. And you've known me since I was teaching at the London School of Astrology, of course, and I've been teaching there since about 2009, something like that.
So I've been, very fortunate, as I said, to be at your lectures. I've seen some quite astounding use of symbology while being there, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to get you on my channel, because I believe that the knowledge and the wisdom that you have really needs to be out there. As I wanted to ask you quickly, just to
sure,
go back. When you mention people's dreams, are you talking about their goals and aspirations, or dreams as in their their own conscious unfolding while they're asleep?
I was referring to dreams as in what they call the hypnagogic and hypnopompic. I'm a bit dyslexic, so I always, sometimes when I get duals, I think hypnopompic is when you come out of dreams. That's when you come out of sleep and you dream in rapid eye movement. And when you go in, I think that's hypnagogic. And you have a dream phase and then you go into deeper sleep, which you don't. So I was referring to that, but it's fascinating. You should see it also a person's imaginal goals, which in fact stem from the same source, you see. That's interesting. I'd never really thought about that at all. That a person's imagining, I mean, we're dreaming as we're speaking. Imagination is going on all the time. If we tend to not focus on it, but it's still there in the background. So that's more conscious wishing or conscious desiring.
Oh, I have a million questions on that. That's probably going to have to be for another video.
Or maybe not. We're talking about mainly symbols and how you can access information through divination and communication in a way through different elements of the psyche, another person's or yours, through tarot.
For sure. So one of the things,
or through astrology,
that I wanted to ask you there is, then do you, the whole thing about the law of attraction and, you know, this whole idea of cosmic ordering and all of that stuff, then
Could
are
you
you
speak up? No, it's all right. It's all right. It's okay, but you need to speak up, or it keeps on fading in and out. It's all right.
are you then able to utilize those symbols for that same effect, or are they kind of separate from something such as?
Okay, well, we're straight away moving on more of the esoteric, occultish side of symbology, which essentially was to do with trafficking, or used to be thought of as trafficking, or with other intelligences. Either they were angels or diamonds or spirits of some kind. And in the medieval period, astrology, symbology would be used to contact apparently objective entities. Now, let's not get into a dialogue about whether they're real or not real. They're real on their own plane, and they might as well be objective. We don't know, because we live inside our, you know, we perceive things through images and so on. So that is tantamount to manipulation of the astral plane. The astral plane being the imaginal world, or if you can imagine it as, we have the physical, and we have the cosmic or celestial, and in between that we have the imaginal, and that's where most of the astral work takes place. And you can put seeds into that, right? It's very magical work. I'm going to do a series on the full and new moons, and often if you want to seed something in your unconscious or your subconscious, you do it just before you sleep. You seed something in, and you take that in a kind of globule or a symbol, and you sink it in. And it's best to do that at the time of the new moon, or just before, 12 hours before the new moon. Okay. And that is a basic manifestation principle there. But although that can be done, and things magically produce that way, these days I'm more Taoistic. I want to go along with the harmony of the universe, and if I'm in harmony, things will come, hopefully, in theory, according to what I need, including difficult situations, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually that really leads me into one of the things I wanted to talk to you about as well. We have sort of this understanding that's slightly emerged now, that your astrology and even your tarot readings, that it's all kind of set in stone, that, you know, that's kind of it with your fate and stuff.
When you say are you talking about me personally, or one, or yours? Or
yeah, doing that Aquarian thing.
Well, you are an Aquarian, and you know, because you refer to the all.
Yes, for sure. For those of you that don't know, Richard is a sun sign Cancer and has his moon in Aquarius. I am a sun sign Aquarius who has his moon in Cancer. You can see that amazing interplay there as well. And I'd really like if you could, maybe later on, maybe you can delve into how that symbolism works in its opposition and its mutual reception. So yeah, does free will negate, or rather, does fate negate free will when it comes to astrology, when it comes to tarot and symbology and symbolism? Do, you know, people have this idea that it's kind of stuck as it is, and it's really interesting that you mentioned that, you know, your chart is alive, it moves, it breathes, it has to change and evolve, and that's, I think, one of the things that I really want to hit home to people. This idea of, you know, fate and free will. And I always kind of try to say to people, it's fate and free will, not fate versus free will.
Yeah.
Really, really important understanding.
Yes, are we fated or are we free? Is everything predetermined or not? I would simply, the greatest, well, in my opinion, one of the greatest treatises on this is Liz Green's Astrology of Fate. It is a hard read, and it needs to be eaten by degrees, you know, just little bits at a time. Anyway, what that triggers off in me is you've put it into two separate camps, fate and free will. And whereas it is fate and free will, I agree with you. But what do you mean by negate? You see, because free will is only free to the degree to which you're conscious. The more unconscious you are of your actions and motivations, the more subject you are to fate. And fate being a kind of something, just, I don't mean providence, I mean fate. Psychotherapy is an experiment to intervene consciously and to make things appear, make things come out as self-knowledge, so you don't follow the same old trends. Yeah. Now, if your sun in Aquarius, you are fated to experience the life force through that central pattern. There's nothing you can do about it. Aquarius isn't just that or that. It's a spectrum of energy which you bring form to. Right? So one end of the spectrum with Aquarius is an interest in environmental study. The ore, how the earth works. It needn't be just intellectual. Another end is philosophical or metaphysical speculation, you know, the cosmic. So it fates you within a certain parameter defined by the symbol. You can't get out of that. It's part of your makeup. But how conscious you are depends on how you direct that energy. It's like saying you have potential, but unless you work to channel, focus, or organize that potential, then your fate's going to be set. Absolutely. You know, what happens if you don't leave home? What you know, psychologically and actually. I mean, I've met some 75-year-old children in terms of their emotional maturity. I don't say that with any criticism. We've all got infantile parts of ourselves which tend to come out in arguments. Do you see? So I think that free will is the thing which can be enlarged, and so we can choose to join our fate.
Yeah.
Oh, and even shape it. And I think this word destiny is slightly different, and I think destiny is the same route as destination, right? So where you're going, the line, and your destiny is what you make if you've got certain parameters. Let's use the metaphor of a chessboard. Everybody's got the same pieces, the same board, 64 squares, black and white. It's a great metaphor for life. How are you going to use the pieces? If you don't know anything about the game or strategy, you're going to lose every game. So it depends on how conscious you are of the game and how to use your particular style. Some might want to rush the pawns up. Some might want to. Chess is a fantastic metaphor for life. And Garry Kasparov, world champion for many years, actually wrote a book called How Chess Reflects Life, or something like that. Anyway, that's my, sorry, long answer, but these things are important.
Actually, this is exactly the type of thing that I think people...
You faded out again, Raphael.
Yeah, sorry. No, what I was saying is I actually think that's brilliant. I really love your answer, and actually this is the kind of thing that I actually think a lot of people need to hear.
Unfortunately, your voice is very faint.
Okay, yeah, it's just the microphone. I have no idea why it's...
Well, maybe the volume, maybe you need to keep it a little bit more raised, and You know, let's try that.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying,
That's great. That's great, by the way. It's great.
This is exactly the kind of thing that I actually think people need to hear. And the reason I asked that question is one of the questions that tends to get posed a lot to astrologers that I know, to other tarot readers, anybody in the realm of, let's say, prediction and understanding pattern. They always get asked, oh, you know, can I change the outcome of this? Or, oh, is this my fate? Or does that mean that's my destiny? And one of the reasons I love your answer is because it actually gives the responsibility and the power back to the people that are asking that question. The second you ask somebody and say, oh, well, does that mean I can't change it? Or is that my fate then? Or is that my destiny? Just in asking the question, you've already implied that you're giving away your power in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, so what you've said there is absolutely brilliant. And I totally resonate with it, because it's like, well, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, well, Liz Green points out she uses the astrological symbol of Pluto, but Pluto is not a Roman god. It's yes, it's a Roman god, and before that it was Hades, which is actually Hades is still used in the Bible. Actually, as the realm of hell. So that's unfortunately that symbol changed. But before that, Liz Green was looking at the older gods of the underworld, Ereshkigal, and the basic one, Moira, the dark goddess of fate, which is in many ways when we incarnate, when spirit incarnates as a material form and a certain section of time. Moira actually means an allotment.
Sorry, you cut out there. I've just lost you.
Your allotment. What you know, so all right.
Sorry, I lost you there. You're frozen.
Okay, well, it's okay on my screen so far.
Okay, so you'd got to Moira. If you could repeat that for me.
Yeah, and this is the way it goes. If this is the way it is, this is the recording. I'm fine with it. If it fades in and out, well, it's just too bad. We got Mercury retrograde, and is it? That's one of the cosmic symbols right now. Mercury is appearing to go backwards, and it's in the Sagittarius, I think. Is it Sagittarius? Oh, I don't know. Leo. Okay.
It's gone back into Cancer.
Okay. Sorry, it's Jupiter in Sagittarius that's going backwards as well. No, all I was saying was Moira means what you've been allotted, your genetic gene pool, your education, your background, your body, and in a psychological sense, the what Jung called the predestinatory character. That somehow is an archetypal patterning beyond you. Archetypal means your inward conditioning. And you can see this in babies. You can see this in pets. You know, a Leo dog is different to a Virgo dog.
Yeah,
you can see the personality different. You know, there are all kinds of genetic fates, and sometimes there's medical fates. I mean, there are certain, but I don't think we should. Those are preconditioned. You know, some people have, for example, an embolism, you know, ready to go off in their head at some point, you know, age of a certain age. You know, medical science has proved this. That's a kind of fate, but that's not the kind of thing we're talking about here. That's a different kind of fated thing.
Okay,
so Moira is the goddess of the underworld, and she means your allotment of time. And what you've been given, and an allotment is, you know, like full of bits, but it depends on what you do with it, and what you do with it depends on how conscious you can become of it.
I love that. So actually that leads me quite nicely onto the next question that I had for you. In terms of the importance,
speak up a bit.
in terms of the importance of myth for humanity, what do what's your thought on how important the symbols play into the archetypes and how important the archetypes are to us as people?
Well, let me just reverse it a bit. Let me hear you. What do you mean by archetype and myths? What's your idea about it? Then we'll engage a bit more of a dialogue here. I've got a lot to say because archetypes and Jung and things, but we've got to be careful with our definitions. What do you?
Sure.
What's your conception?
So when I talk about archetypes, I mean, obviously my background is mostly tarot, so that's what I'm thinking about. Now, as an example, we'll take the High Priestess because we're both very familiar with her, right? So when you think about the High Priestess as an archetype, what you would be looking at is things like intuition, the psychic ability, the other realm wherein you find all things of a spiritual and psychic nature. But beyond that, her archetype is of something other that comes through symbols without words. So she is effectively in the tarot, especially when you're talking about men. If you were reading for a man, she would represent either his wife or his mother, always the most important female in his life. So she's an archetype of the feminine that is most important to him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean by an archetype. In terms of in terms of myths, and we're talking about the stories that permeate and have survived thousands of years, from the tales of Hercules right through to seeing Thor on the big screen, and everything in between. One of the things that we touched on earlier, which I thought was really cool, is why we get so emotive about those things. These are stories that have been told hundreds, thousands of different ways, but we're still so connected to those characters when we see them. It's not just about the dramatic music or the CGI effect. There's something in that character that you see and you say, wow, I understand that journey, or I resonate with that because I can see it in the path that I've experienced and lived in some way.
Yes. Okay, I think we ought to, though, just delineate archetypes a bit more, because there's a difference between archetypal images,
mm-hmm.
which is what we use: Mars, Moon, all the signs of the zodiac, High Priestess, the Fool, the Juggler, the Hierophant, the Devil. These are called archetypal images, and they have a profound emotive effect on the psyche when you see them. But archetypes themselves, there's also archetypal experiences: mm-hmm. love, death, birth, all of these. So archetypes are common experiences to all of humanity. So we all have a Saturn, let's say, in our chart. We all have all of the major arcana, all of the minor arcana.
Absolutely.
But we also have archetypal patterns of development. Now, archetype simply means a principle, a root pattern. There's been a lot in neuroscience at the moment about archetypal responses to life, animal responses, which are innate. Like in astrology, we have the moon is our archetypal feeling of wanting to bond. It's the archetype of empathy. So we have this feeling about something, and so the moon tells us very much about that. But so archetypes are essential patterns of experience, patterns of development, like the hero, right? And they're also, but how the mind conceives them from instincts or from other places is that it perceives images. It feels a certain way. It feels a certain emotion. And so archetypal images of the tarot, archetypal images of the zodiac, give us the basic representation, a a pictorial, artistic representation of a primordial pattern.
Yeah.
So when you experience death or loss or fear, not fear, but those kind of things are common to everybody. We all have all of the horoscope. We all have all of the tarot inside it. So archetypal images then, such as myth, the hero, for example, Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, traces the primal myth, the primal mythological experience, which all develops actually from ancient Egypt, from the rising of the sun, from the over the ascendant, and it hits midday, and then at sunset, it's set to battle his brother Set. So where it sets, you see, Osiris and Set. And so setting, the setting sun is the darkness. Now, later on, unfortunately, that symbology of darkness became to be known as evil because it was anti-light. But darkness is where we come from. I don't want to go into the symbology of the dark and so on, because that relates to the mother and darkness and womb and so on. But I'm not equating light and dark as good and evil, which it then became.
Which is really important. Again, that point that you make there. Again, this is another thing. I think I'm going to touch on this briefly because I know it triggers a lot of people. One of the things that I often try to
speak up a bit, Raphael, and then that's it.
One of the things that I often try to get across to people is that when we talk about masculine and feminine, we're talking about a polarity. When we're talking about light and dark, we're talking about different spectrums of vibration, so to speak. It's nothing to do with good and evil, and the terms of kind of over time become synonymous somehow. And it's really good that you brought that up. I think it's really important to reiterate that to people. So when we talk about the negative, the dark, the womb and all of that stuff, it's absolutely true. There's no light inside there, but it produces these wonderful beings that we are every single day, in the hundreds and thousands. So it's really important to separate that and to actually define it more. So thank you for that.
That's all right. I just wanted to say a bit more. So what you're involved with as a practitioner of the tarot is you've been fascinated by the images which have been a product of the imagination, and according to mythologists and Jungian analysts anyway, that it's been known that there are structures of consciousness right from the archaic level, which is instincts, reptilian, animal nature, where all the animal gods were, and then there's it moves up to what is called a mythological layer of perception. And that's where you and I work with. We work with that mythological layer. Now, on top of that is rational interpretation. And these are structures of the mind, if you like. And on top of that is a spiritual or transcendent force. At least that's the theory. But where we're dealing in that magical, mythic layer, and the mythic layer sees pattern. It sees a development. So it turns the sun into a hero. That's what I was going to say. It came over and it's come out of the darkness. And so all of these myths were, it was the victorious sun, the Sol Invictus. It's rise towards our midlife and our theosis, and it's a long walk to death. So it becomes the hero's journey. The sun, that was the primal myth that we all have in us. And in fact, it happens every day. The sun comes out, the darkness goes, and then it's not totally dark because the moon guides us in the darkness. And I link very much the tarot more to the moon than I do the sun, because we're dealing in, talking about the sea priestess, goddess of the sea. We're moving in image and archetypal light, astral light, imaginal reality. But there is a layer of us which perceives meaning and a structure of pattern. So even before we interpret what that pattern means, where it's going into the future, which is prediction or projection into the future, then we need to know that mythological layer in us exists. It's not literal, but it exists, and that's the fascination with all the Marvel comics and Doctor Strange and Iron Man and Spider-Man, mixing animal and, you know, it's all great, and they've got magical powers, because magical powers of old in Egypt were all animal gods, you see, animal gods. So anyway, we have that layer, and you are a practitioner of seeping yourself and understanding these archetypal images, which are artistic forms of primal patterns. And this is why they affect everybody, because we see a primal archetypal layer of our life, and we, in a distant bell, a click goes on through the symbol, and it symbolizes something primal and some excitement. We start to identify a part of the psyche with some, and depending on our, you know, I always used to like the baddies. You know, what's it be? You know what I mean? I used to like, well, you know, I remember watching my first movie, Dracula movie, you know, the 1932 with Bela Lugosi. I was frightened out of my wits. But I thought, isn't that good to have those kind of powers of the night, you know?
Yeah, he could. He had all kinds of mental powers as well, didn't he?
Oh, brilliant.
On top of one thing that you touched on there that I thought was brilliant is how you are able to use the symbol and tap into something beyond what you're looking at. I've actually seen you do this in one of the classes when you were talking about people with Leo on the ascendant and you know, what that might mean and how it might transpire. And I remember one of the things that you mentioned was a propensity to be late. And literally within seconds, in walks one of the students at the school who was slightly late and apologized for being late, like literally seconds after you'd said it.
Yeah.
And then I think you went on to ask her if she had something that resembled the sun in her bag. And she said, well, actually, I've got an orange.
Oranges. So I talked about the sun as in oranges. Yes, that's right. Which
was, for me, absolutely phenomenal, because that's when you start to see it in motion, in actuality. And what you'd done there was taken the symbol, like you'd understand. I mean, you obviously understand them so well. And you literally tapped into that web that we talk about. You know, the spidey senses, as I call them, kind of went off and tingled. And in she walks and literally demonstrates in real life everything that you intuited.
Yes.
Due to the symbol.
Yes.
And that is fascinating to me. That's, you know, when you move into the realm of like, okay, there's definitely more here than just, you know, reading.
Yeah.
Kind of your horoscope on a daily basis.
There's more going on than interpretation of the mental faculties. This is where astrology and I think tarot, you can be taught this means this means that, and you know, I mean, I remember getting my first tarot deck and setting up the readings, and what does that fourth position mean, and this, and you've got to somehow link the symbol to it, and it starts to become a little bit of a mental game. And that's necessary. You've got to learn the language of any system, any symbolic system you use. But there's so much more going on, and at that magical mythic layer. So because I was trained in the Western mystery tradition to move with symbol, move into it, explore it, bring it out, in a technical sense, what you do and what you ought to be doing in in a psychological technical sense, is you'll be moving into a what they call a liminal state of consciousness. Now, liminal, roughly equivalent to an alpha state, where the brain waves go down slightly and you're in a slight trance. Trance state, we get them throughout the day, but it's a liminal state in which the perception of imagery and subtle a subtle perception, let's call it psychic perception for now. If you lower consciousness, lower the mental faculties, you go into a liminal state, and things happen in that state.
Absolutely.
There's a famous lots of stories about Osman Spare. Osman Spare was an occultist of early 20th century, and he was asked to perform this, and he has his whole in fact he produced his own tarot,
Okay.
They were called the Arena of Anon, and anyway, he used symbols to magically produce things, and he concentrated on one. Somebody was focused on something, they wanted his mind read, and so Spare went through this image and symbol, and there was a knock on the door, and a pair of shoes were delivered, and that was the thing that he was thinking about. Now, that's a true story.
Wow. That's pretty
Now, in other words, he didn't just read his mind that he was thinking of shoes, he had them delivered. Now, that's a true story.
Wow.
And in that state, there's a magical connection between things, and you can find that through the symbol, as long as you can lower your consciousness to a certain extent and control it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know which pagan, occultist, anybody in those circles that doesn't meditate in some way, shape, or form.
You're a little quiet.
Sorry, they're all very practiced at meditation of some sort. And usually that's, I mean, I've got so many series of books on witches and fiction ones. And one of the things that they all have a thread of is that you sink into a specific state in order to achieve magic, right?
Yes, that's right.
It's absolutely spot on. So what I want to ask you then, because I saw you do this in a classroom. So is it just your complete grasp of the symbols, or is there more to it than that? Are you always, kind of on, so to speak?
I like to see any symbol system that we use, tarot, yarrow sticks, bones, patterns of bones, tea leaf reading. I mean, I looked up the different forms of divination actually on Wikipedia before I came on here, and there's hundreds of them. There's chiromancy and this, that, omancy, and cartomancy is what you do, of course, cards, all of that. Without training, astrology tarot is a training in using a symbol system.
Yes.
So we have the application, whether that's in psychology or prediction or guidance or advice. My lectures on levels. Symbols can appear at any level, practically, psychological, emotional, and things like that. But the problem with lowering consciousness is that if you don't retain a certain focus or concentration, you can lose yourself in a train of thought that's entirely subjective.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is the problem with some psychics who can't translate the image or the symbol or the experience into practical advice, because they pick up all kinds of associations of their own unconscious. So it's very difficult to describe, I think, how telepathy or things work. But I think it's essentially that if it's called transference in psychotherapy, that you pick things up, and it's in a transference state, a liminal state, that you're perceiving things. See, but you've got to remain awake and not go into trance. Otherwise, you'll become a trance medium, and you won't know you've done it.
Okay, awesome.
So my teacher first described this process, especially in ritual, is rather like a submarine. You put yourself into a bubble, a submarine, and then you allow yourself to move along with the flow of the symbol, but don't let it get out of hand. Okay. This is why you have your structure, your Celtic cross symbols or whatever, and we have the diagrams, and it keeps us on track. Without that, the world is just plain imagination with no structure.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
I don't know whether that explains it. Who can explain it? I tend to, when I'm in somebody's presence, they affect me, and then I direct my attention through to the symbol. Now, there's been a lot of reading, study, research, contemplation, thought, questioning, lectures. I filled up what mental research I have about the symbol, but then I let all that go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the vital steps as well.
I mean, what have you found? What have you found in your readings? We got to be, Aquarius got to be the same as Neptune's, Pisces. They got to be careful that they just don't get lost in their own soup.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the early days, it's interesting that you mentioned cartomancy as well. Cartomancy is how I started. So I had my sister go off on her travels to Greece. She comes back, and by this time, I mean, I was like 13. So by this time, I was already the kooky kid that was into anything, you know, sort of out there, fringe or spooky.
I can identify with that.
She comes back. She says to me, I'm going to read your cards. Now, I'd seen my mum and her friends have tarot readings aplenty. She then went on to become a born-again Christian. I don't know how that works, but whatever, you know, each to their own. But anyway, to come back to it, she read for me just a set of playing cards, and straight away my brain went, yes, that's me. I love that. That makes total sense to me. And what she told me, you know, she'd been in another country, so it was pretty interesting that she was able to give me that information. So I then went through the process of, again, like you said, learning the symbols, looking at cards. I then graduated from the playing card deck to a tarot deck. And again, same, hours of reading, looking at different versions of the same deck, understanding, you know, what this meaning was and this association. And I remember reading a book by Reydiant, not sure if you've heard of her. She's an Australian witch, very, very gifted. And one of the things she said was, she actually said at the end of the chapter, now that you know all of this, you've got to let it all go. And I was like, mind blown. So when I hear you say that, I'm like, yeah, I'm totally there, because if you can't get away from the association, you don't allow the intuitive faculty to open up.
Yes.
The symbol will take you so far, and then when you get the goosebumps up the back of the neck and the little shivers and something whispers in the ear or in the back of your mind, that's when the intuition has been activated enough.
Right.
And I believe that it reaches out to the client's energy, melds with that, and kind of then skips off along their timeline to see what their pattern is, but also what are the likelihoods or the predictions that are about to come forward. So yeah, absolutely. I think when I go into I can remember a few tarot readings where even I look back and I'm like, I could not have known that by any other way. you know, and those are the moments that stick with you, or when people well up in tears and say, where the did that come from? You know, because there's no way, I've never told anybody that. And that's when you start to understand that, yes, the symbols are so powerful. They draw you in. And like you said, if you stay focused and stay with it enough, it will show you things that you never thought possible.
Yes. I following the line of the symbol, and you always started off with a technical reading. This means this means that, and then something may lead you down a path. I sometimes get a feeling, maybe a subconscious feedback from your client, which is perceived by your subconscious, and then that may direct you as well. So what you call intuition, that's why I've called my first booklet Training of the Symbol to Substance, is called, from symbol to the substance of interpretation, the training of the astrological intuition. And in there I show, it was a small booklet, so I couldn't do it, the various methods of exploring and studying symbols. So I gave a framework of an all level, all lines, how to train your mind in doing that. But that won't tell you, that will open things up. But if you follow the line of a symbol, you were talking, how did I know she was going to walk in with oranges? I didn't know she was going to walk in.
Seen it, because my mouth was practically open.
Yeah. But there was a lot going on in that lecture. If you remember, there was one woman at the back. I saw some transit and said she got married. Something, her sister was abroad, got married. Something had opened up. But that kind of psychism sometimes is a gift. Mm-hmm. Our occultists used to call them being in touch with divinatory intelligences. And I think divination, as opposed to prediction, is an important distinction, because divination is a calling. Well, there are two forms. One is calling upon. It's called a bidden omen. You call upon the intelligences to tell you something. It's called divination by the bones. Actually, that's the old term. That's what you and I do. We cast a horoscope, and it's like a tea leaf in the bottom of the thing, and it's like the pattern is there. Now, astrology is a very, very complicated a process of detail of different kinds of pattern. There's loads, there's movement, there's positions, and so on. It is a very complicated business. It takes a lot of time to learn. It's a whole lifetime learning, as you know. But that's called a bidden omen or a bidden divination. Sometimes divination just comes, so we cast our lots, the runes, and then we read them. But there's also divination by the head. And divination by the head is like a direct telepathic knowing.
Yeah, like a dream or a vision.
Not quite. It's just an intuition. It could be via a dream, but it's just, you say something and it's highly accurate. Something just occurs to you. But there's also the next one, the three basic forms of divination, is divination by the spirit, which is an intelligence telling you something. You see, so that could be dreams or prophecies or visions, or some people get clairaudience. I'm a bit clairaudient. I sometimes hear things. I'm clairsentient. So my son's in Cancer. You're a bit clairsentient. You get a feeling. You don't quite know what it is, but it's up to your powers and your skills to translate that feeling into an articulate form which can be understood. You were talking about Aquarius, Cancer. I think those two, whichever way around, That's its particular skill. It can feel and interpret at the same time.
Yeah, interesting point you make there, actually, because when I started school with the LSA, here I am, yeah, boasting, well, not boasting, but, you know, I'm proud of the fact that I'm an Aquarius sun, always have been, you know, from yay high, knowing that I was Aquarius. I didn't know why it was great, but I thought it was anyway. And then when I start sort of talking about feelings and emotions and intuition, people were like, that doesn't work. You're an Aquarius. That's not really your realm. And then when they discovered that I had a Cancer moon, that's when they were like, ah, okay. So yes, you're an Aquarius sun, and that gives you all of that. But your ability to tap into and feel things and talk about emotions quite freely comes from your moon.
Yes. Absolutely. But they're in quincunx, 150 degrees apart, so they're a bit tricky to put together. It's rather like the mind and feelings. Mind and feelings are a little bit opposed.
I'm seeing the, you know, the picture of the brain and the heart. Yeah. One's going this way and the other one's going that way. Yeah, absolutely. I understand that. Yeah. So I want to ask you, astrology and how it works. What do you not maybe.
Well, we've just outlined it, I think. It's a very specialized field because the symbols are based upon the actual placements. If you could go outside of the solar system and look down on it and put the Earth at the center, and at the time of your birth, that would be your horoscope. So it's not an imaginal representation. It is a mathematically accurate portrayal, right? And the zodiac and so on is built upon the sun's motion around the Earth. It's divided into 12 months. So it's a reflection on the cosmic order. Yeah. That's the first thing. The second thing is that who knows what realities the mythic perception can show other than, you see, astrology changed from astrology and astronomy. That started to divide round about 1600, 1500. You know, that we moved into science and that turned into astronomy, but astrology. So there was people believed mythic perception. There's the moon. We called it the moon. Who knows? So maybe the unconscious, the perception of myth and our projected imagination onto planets and so on, which is basically what we're reading, a projection of something, of an order. But maybe in a more occult sense, this is the way that we do read metaphysical reality. You know, that you can perceive things. That's where omen reading, for example, came from. Great omen readers, particularly ogres, right? Ogres were people that knew what was going to happen or something simply by looking at flights of birds. Yeah. The way they squawked, the direction they were going up, you know, they appeared across the sky at a certain time. And this was a perception that they'd learned to interpret, you see. So I think it's basically a training of the imagination, and through symbology, it perhaps connects to very diverse things. It's not really a science, as in if you do this, this happens, but it is an intuitive science.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? It's really interesting that you touch upon that. I was speaking then about the.
You've gone quiet again. What were you saying again?
I was just thinking about the links between the tarot and the astrology. So
right.
The major arcana especially, you can find all of the planets, all of the signs. They're all in there. If you know what card you're looking at, you know what its associations are.
Yeah.
You can find the signs and the planets, which fascinates me to absolutely no end. To take that even further, you can actually see some of the correlation between what a planet represents and what the card is telling you as well. Yeah. So Uranus, for example, you know, the shocking and, you know, all of the revelations and rebellion and, you know, kind of breaking of the old, so to speak. If you said that to a tarot reader, they'd say to you the Tower.
The Tower, yes. I immediately see the lightning bolt striking the top of the tower, yes.
Absolutely. So, I really love that. I think where astrology has the drop is it's a lot more vast. And I think, I don't know, I kind of feel sometimes that the symbology of astrology is still as rich now as it ever has been. With the age of oracle decks and all the rest of it, I kind of feel like some of the tarot's true meaning and some of the depth that it really has kind of been watered down a little.
Yeah, well, come back to this idea of archetypes or fundamental patterns in nature. And how are those perceived? They're perceived by the magical and mythic layer of the structure of consciousness. Interpretation is a head thing. Interpretation, you could interpret it in a psychological sense. You could interpret it in character. You know, if I was to do a reading on your Aquarius, we could talk about that as part of your character. We could talk about a part of a life pattern which you revolve around. That's a transpersonal interpretation. You know, we could say you have certain behaviors or mannerisms that Aquarius, you know, one of them is this, you know.
Yeah.
You know, like looking to the heavens. And using words like, oh yes, one does this, and we. You're talking about the universal structure of life, and it can be very depersonalizing. You know, who you're talking at. You know.
Yeah, very, very.
I mean, I once had a strong Aquarian in my room, and she simply all the session she simply says, "Well, we do this and we do that," and I said, "Who's the we?" And she didn't have a personal conception of I. It's very strange. So you need personal planets and the other side, you know. So we could talk about the level of the manifestation of the archetype, right? And that's the art of using symbolism in a particular way in guidance. But I have a nagging suspicion that tarot that astrology has tended to become a bit more mathematical. Mm-hmm. You know, the idea that, oh, you can work it out. This is that, you know, it's very geometrical. And so it tends to move away. Before Liz came onto the scene and introduced myths again and the dynamic movement of planets, there's a whole process going on with Saturn. There's an archetypal figure, Kronos and Old Father Time and Set and all of that. And so she reintroduced the imaginal into astrology, whereas before it was all trying to work out techniques. I've never felt that, you know, like in the Astrological Associate, John Addy working out all the harmonics of this and the fifth, second harmonic of that. And it all turned out to techniques, whereas tarot, they're very image-like. They're archetypal image which seem to emerge, and they take you into an imaginal emotional experience, and you can talk with them. So that kind of psychic, mediumistic quality has tended not to move with astrology, and that's what I've been trying to reintroduce. Astrology is divination as well as interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't know a lot about the tarot. Obviously, I've studied it. I've done readings and bits and pieces. But I think you have to be of a certain type. You have to do all your intellectual stuff and know where to take it and so on. But in the end, can you divine what it's saying? Can you it affects you and allow your imagination to open up to the symbol and move with it? Very mediumistic. You understand what I mean by mediumistic?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm there.
Because occultism talks about symbols in two ways. First of all, there's the form, the archetypal form, the appearance of things, and also in terms of a force.
As in its underlying.
There's an energy force behind it. You know, like I think when we were talking before, I often see Galadriel in Lord of the Rings as the, you know, the moon priestess, the sea priestess, you know, because she looks in all the water and she moves slowly and she glides and she seems to be able to get inside your mind. And what she doesn't say things like Gandalf says, like this. It's very wizened. You know, he's a wise man. He says this, but he's very rational. He knows languages and so on, but she seems to be able to talk in the realm of emotions and allows her emotions to speak, and she trusts them absolutely.
Yeah.
And the words she uses sometimes are more accurate to the truth than a rational frame. We were talking about this before, when she looks for Gandalf in her mind, when she asks, where's he gone? And where's Gandalf? And you remember the first one. And her expression is she looks for him and she can't find him. She can't find him in herself. He doesn't exist somehow for her emotionally. He's gone. And she says he's fallen into shadow.
Yeah.
She didn't say he's dead, because she knows that's her intuition is telling her. And I think falling into shadow is much more accurate to the truth than what actually happened to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you see? So that the sea priestess, for me, she was an archetypal figure, and that comes back to mythology and all of the stuff that we've been talking about. We recognize these archetypal powers in us, and the image is a portrayal of it. That's my archetypal forms, but behind that is a force, is an energy dynamic as well. Occultism, you know, speaks about evoking the energy behind the symbol. That's a different process. Sometimes I do that in astrological practice, where sometimes I become the transiting planet. I've often noticed that. It's like you have Saturn opposed Moon at the moment, right? So I might suddenly say to you, well, you've got to get grips with your emotional structure. You need, okay, if I was in a session with you and I know that transiting Saturn is opposed to your Moon,
yeah,
I might become more Saturn. I might become the guide and say, look, how are you handling your emotional moods these days? Mm-hmm. You know, because because you're feeling isolated emotionally. Saturn is coming along. The Moon hates Saturn, doesn't want to be controlled or contained. It just wants to cry and enjoy itself and eat cakes, you know. Right?
I'm laughing because that's not actually far from the truth.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, all those Cancerian, munchy, feel, you know, emotional, you know, so let's sink into the next Netflix movie and forget everything, you know, all that lovely, comforting, you know, buy myself a fluffy cushion. And you're doing all that, but Saturn is saying, look, if you let this wildness of your emotional sea self flow all over the place and you feel lost or discarded or rejected or a bit alone and isolated in your emotional feeling, Saturn comes along and says, look, how are you going to handle this? He's a more of an instructor guide, you see, and I might become mediumistic and become Saturn a bit, you see, rather than just interpreting that aspect as this means this and this. Actually become it and involve myself in a dialogue with your Moon.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you could take over. Because okay, how am I going to understand and frame and father my emotional self? That's what, yeah, that was a word which came to me. So if I was working with somebody like that's kind of how I would work.
Yeah. No, that's
really how does that make sense? Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. So, and one of the things that I like about that as well is, as we're talking about Saturn, one of the things that came to me is you would literally become the catalyst for the framework that they put in place to deal with that emotional state.
That's a great way of putting it, Raphael. Yeah.
No, but I totally get it. I love that. And it makes total sense. So, for people when they're, you know, maybe researching their own transits and stuff, with the symbol, what would you, do you have any advice for people on how they could better use a transit? Like, not a specific one, but like, what would be the best way to utilize the symbol?
Well, it takes a great deal of practice to first of all know what the symbol means technically, and then apply it. I suddenly went into my mode, my astrology mode with you, and suggested some certain things, and then my intuition gave you a little reading on Moon in Cancer eating his cream cakes in front of the television. You know, that's an image. You know, but what it means is that Cancerians are very, very fragile and sensitive in their emotions to the world, to other people, and they need a safe space. They need their bed. You know, it's like sometimes they just need to go to bed and go back into the womb and you know, for 20 minutes, you know, all the stuff that you do that I don't know you do, but I know you do, right?
Me
and so that the application of symbolism is a skill. But what I would say to people is that they get to grips with the fundamentals of the two sides of the aspect. What does the moon mean? What does Saturn mean? Yes. In other words, the transit is a triggering off of the key element of the chart. And I've just done a simple reading over Saturn there. So I became Saturn. And so you would certainly do that. And then if you did that study without just interpreting it, without immediately going to what does this mean, your work on those two planetary symbols would naturally evolve into some kind of guidance.
Wow, love that.
By a dream, or you might go, actually, I need a reading. You know, I need to go to Raphael and see what this means. Where am I? But you'd be more open because you'd be participating in your own transit rather than thinking, it's interesting, rather than thinking it's a fate that's happening to me.
Yeah.
The question I would say is, how are you going to participate in this experience, which is timed? You have to go through this. What are you going to make of it? And that's interesting that we've come a bit of a full circle there.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. 2 points I actually wanted to verify for you. Myself and a friend, she's a Cancer rising, and we talk about our Cancer cave. So when we're having our moment or we need to retreat, we go into the little Cancer cave. So I thought it was really funny that you mentioned and touched on that. And the other part of it is, yes, absolutely, about the becoming a part of a person's reading. I've actually seen myself come up in somebody else's cards and say, well, look, there's me reading for you. And this is what you're supposed to get out of the whole scope of whatever interaction is taking place here. Phenomenal. Thank you so much. I could literally listen to you for hours.
Well, I hope this is the first of many. I just say that I think the training as a psychoanalyst also helps, because it's about psychoanalysis. It's not just about interpretation. It's about being involved with people, but also being objective. So you can come out of the experience and comment on it. Do you see? So that when you're interpreting, you're part of the experience, but you can also see the dynamic. So it's like having an objective awareness on what's going on, as well as being involved with what's going on. And that training, I think, should be all part of tarot readers and astrologers.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make, Over the years, I've done a lot of work on myself on things that, you know, because it is important.
Yeah.
I feel one of the things that you touched on earlier, which I think is really important, as a reader, whether it's astrology, you know, bones, candle flame, whatever,
Yes.
tarot,
Yeah.
you need to be free enough of your own stuff to get out of the way of what's coming through, so that you can give people the pertinent information, and also, like you said, turn it, you know, from whatever is coming through from there into what you can use on a daily basis.
Yes.
On a real everyday level. It's phenomenal. Richard, where can people find you? How can they contact you for readings and sessions?
Well, looks like you're going to be my agent for a little while. You want a little commission? Yeah, for now, there. If you want to pass anybody on my telephone number, feel free. I do Skype sessions and so on. I like that. But I've also started off my video series on YouTube, and I'm a little behind you, Rafe. You've got your act together with all that. I'm just starting to learn this and YouTube and get the info out there, and so my infrastructure is not as advanced as yours as yet. But nevertheless, it starts with word of mouth and things like this, and of course I'm open for business.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much.
Would that be all right? Is that too impertinent of me to ask you to, if people want to get in touch with me? And then eventually, when I get my Facebook page, I mean, yours is beautiful. Yours is already done. You're going to be used as a template for me. See, so this is the first. Well, this is the first part of getting all this stuff out and getting a conversation and going in me setting up an infrastructure so that people